So this video is going to cover using audio files or playing back a recording in Max and how you can use that for various reasons, how you can play an audio file back. So to start with, let's talk about the things we need to make something play an audio file. The first thing we're going to need is something called buffer. So the buffer tilde object is really useful for allocating a certain amount of the hard drive and loading an audio file into Max. The second thing we're going to need, of course, is something to play that audio file with. Now there are lots of options here. The good ones are play tilde, plays an audio file. We also have groove tilde, also plays an audio file. And if we actually just go into the help file, let's type in groove. Let's take a look at the help file and what the options are here. So in addition to that, we have a couple other choices. There's some of these I've never used. I've never used wave. I've never used this phase groove or the MCS groove. I'm not even sure what they do. They may play an audio file. Obviously, interesting that groove tilde, well, we're on groove tilde, but there used to be other options in Max, one called SF play, which might still exist as a kind of a legacy. Let me see if SF play, yes, so SF play is still in here, although it's not listed as an option. So SF play is another thing that's going to play an audio file. So the most useful, though, the ones that I've used are groove tilde and play tilde. And they work differently for different reasons. You might want to use groove versus play, etc. In this case, we're going to use groove, which I used almost exclusively, except for certain situations I may use play tilde. So let's build a little patch then that plays an audio file. The first thing we're going to need is to make a buffer. So we're going to use buffer tilde. And then I'm going to give this buffer a name. So, and again, this can be anything. It could be audio file 1, file 1 as a single word. It could be a different name, right? We could call this cats if we want. It doesn't matter. The next thing I'm going to do is give this the number of channels. So I'm going to make a 2 here. And that is telling the buffer that it's a stereo signal. So the buffer is called cats, and again, that's its variable name. It's 2 channels, okay? Now, if I lock this down and double click on the buffer, you'll see it's going to pull up this little window that says cats, but the buffer is empty. Now I can fill the buffer by sending it a message. So what I'm going to do is actually create a new message, M, and type in read. And there's other ones that I can use. I can also use replace. And these two are the most important. Now replace is better than read. Actually, is it read or load? Let me look at the help file. I don't remember. Oh, it's write. Or no, open. That's what it is. If I want to open a file into the buffer, it's not read, I'm sorry. It's open. But we're going to use replace. And what replace does is the buffer is going to be as long as the audio file is. So imagine our audio file is 1 second long. That means the buffer is going to be 1,000 milliseconds. Now, if I load a buffer that's 1,000 milliseconds, the buffer will be 1,000 milliseconds. But imagine I want to change the buffer to something else that is 500 milliseconds. If I were to open this and add a new buffer, it would not actually change the buffer size. It would put in the audio file that was 500 milliseconds and then leave 500 milliseconds of silence. So what replace will do is change the length of the buffer depending on the audio file size. So in addition, if you imagine if I loaded an audio file that was 1,000 milliseconds and then I wanted to load a new one that was 2,000 milliseconds, 1,000 of that would get lost because the buffer was only 1,000 milliseconds long. So replace always makes sure that the audio file is going to be the right length. It's going to be the length of the actual recording. So now that I have this buffer ready and it has the replace button, I'm going to open this by clicking on it, and you can see it's going to pull up the prompt to load an audio file. And I'm just going to go into my samples folder and grab something of mine. Maybe I'll go to my metal sounds and this barn shaker. So I hit open. Now here's another option too. So now, first of all, now if I double click on the buffer, you'll see that the audio file called cats has audio in it. You can see both channels, and there it is. It's ready to go. It's been loaded into memory, and it is a buffer. It is an audio file called cats, right? Again, it's really useful actually to use the name of the audio file as the buffer name. That way you always know what it's supposed to be. So another option is that I can navigate with the Finder to my samples, go to Barn Metals again, Barn Shaker 14. Let's take this one. I can drag and drop this onto the buffer, and it's going to replace that buffer with the new audio file now. So if I double click on this now, the new audio file is there. So that's another way of loading the buffer, okay? So we now have a buffer that is loaded. It has an audio file on there. It's called cats, right? And I can now add other objects to make this actually play the audio file itself. So we're going to use, again, the groove tilde. And groove is really useful. So the first thing I'm going to do is add on here the name cats, right? I want the groove object to play the recording from the cats buffer. So I load that. I'm going to give it 2 channels also, okay? And you'll notice actually, if I take the 2 channels out, look what happens. The groove object now only has one outlet on the bottom, and this is actually telling me when the audio file ends, I think. Yeah, when the audio file ends. So right now this is a mono groove object. It will only play the left or the right channel, not both. So if I want to make this stereo, after cats, spacebar 2, and now you can see I have a channel 1 and a channel 2 output to make it stereo. Okay, so now we're going to add the things that we need to groove to make it play. And the most important thing we need to make it play is the signal tilde object. Okay, and if you open the help file, you can see all these different options here. We have the sig tilde we need, but then we can also add in the speed at which this audio file is played. In addition, we need to trigger the audio file at whatever millisecond I have selected. And then finally, another useful thing is the loop, whether it's looping or not. Okay, so if I add these things in here, I can add these onto my groove object. So what I'm going to do is make N for new, and then type in sig tilde and attach that to the groove object. Okay, now just so you know, if I set the sig tilde to 1 equals normal pitch and speed. Okay, so the way groove object works, and actually there's several modes, but in its generic form, is that this is like a record player. If I slow down an audio file, it's going to play it lower. If I speed it up, it's going to play it higher, just like a record. Now you can separate pitch and speed in the groove object, and if you look in the help file, you can find what variables it needs to do that, but we're going to leave it as it is. So 1 is normal pitch, normal speed. You can imagine then 0.5 is 1 octave lower and twice as long. Okay, you can also imagine then that 2 is 1 octave higher and half as long. So that is the general principle with the sig tilde. If you want to change the pitch, I'm going to attach these boxes. So let's just make these as messages. So message 1, and I'm going to actually set the initial value of sig tilde to be 1 decimal. That way, no matter what audio file I put in there, it's going to play at normal pitch and normal speed. But I'm going to attach a 1 to this, a 2, and a 0.5 so that I can change the pitch and speed if I want to. So the next thing, we don't need a whole lot to make this work, is let's move this over here. I'm going to grab my mute button. So let's go to the Finder, Max projects, mute button. Let's grab this. Okay, so now I have my mute button. Now, really importantly, remember, is that almost all, that's not true. A lot of audio is stereo, right? If I have a single microphone, that is going to be mono, but any recording you want to use that's like online or is probably going to be a stereo signal. So what I do is I just connect first outlet to the left outlet inlet and the second outlet to the right inlet. And now my recording, which is stereo, is going to play at normal pitch and normal speed. The next thing I'm going to do is if I send, actually I don't remember, let's take a look here again. Okay, the loop goes into the groove. If I send a message of loop 1, it's actually going to loop this audio file and it'll just play forever if the loop is turned on. The last thing I need to do is trigger my groove object with a starting point. And the most common starting point, of course, is going to be 0. I'm basically saying start at the beginning, right? So that's the start button, essentially. So this should work now. I should be able to now unmute this, turn this on. I was already playing. So if I hit 0, the audio file is playing. Okay, now one mistake that I made here, and I told you guys not to do this, you should use a gain tilde, right? You always want to have volume control in between on your output somewhere. So let's just insert these. Let's bypass this with a gain. Great. So it's just so we can control the audio. We don't want it to be, I mean, I'm lucky that this recording is pretty quiet, so it doesn't matter. But now, if I turn this up, I can hear it. Now, if I hit the 2, listen to what happens. It's playing the audio file twice as fast and 1 octave higher, okay? And you know, this is an exponential equation going on here. So if I want to play the next octave, let's put this in order. It would be 4, right? And you can imagine then 8, etc., etc. If I want to play it an octave lower even than this, 0.25. So let's connect these. And now, when I play this recording, let's hear what we get. I'm gonna hit, so right now it's playing at 2, here's 4, here's 8, here's 0.25. Right? So the audio file is 3 times longer and it's 2 octaves lower in this case. So that is it basically for how I do this. Now let's talk about loop actually. If I want, let's go back to a fast speed like 4, and then I'm going to turn the looper on by clicking loop 1, and now watch what happens when I hit 0. It's just going to play. It'll play forever, right? It'll play forever until I send a 0. Now another thing that I can do, let's mute that. That'll get annoying really quick. I can also send a 0 to the sig tilde object, and then it will shut it down. right? So even though it's playing constantly, if I hit 0, it's going to stop, okay? Now, I forgot to mention too, we can also use numbers, like we can play the audio file in reverse with negatives. -1, -2. So now it's going to be in reverse at normal speed if I put a -2 in. So the looping is looping constantly, right? And it's playing in reverse. So let's do a little bit. I don't want to get too deep in here, but let's do a couple of things to make this more useful. Here's something we haven't talked about yet, but let's make this loop so that I can turn it on and off. And what I'm going to do is actually show you a little trick in Max where you can change a variable based off of an input. So I'm going to use a message loop $1. Okay. Now loop $1 is interesting, and you can have like loop $2, etc. on and on. I'm going to add a toggle on here and watch what happens when I trigger the toggle into loop $1. And you'll see it post down here. So when the toggle is on, it says loop 1. When the toggle is off, it says loop 0. Okay? So remember, the value coming out of the toggle is 0 or 1, right? So what's happening is every time the value coming into loop $1, this is prepended with the word loop, and we're replacing the 0 or the 1 based off the toggle. So now I can replace the toggle, right? Or the toggle is now my loop on and off button instead of this button here, okay? And to take this even a step further, so let's go down here and stick this like this. If I want to have a pretty GUI, I could do this text button. All right, so now I have a text button. Let's go into the help file over here. And I'm going to change the values of this text button. Okay, so first of all, we're going to switch it right now. First, this is actually kind of important. It's actually just a button for pushing. I want to turn this into a toggle. So I'm going to go down here and say parameter mode enabled. Okay. I think that's what I need. No, that was the wrong button. I'm sorry. Where is it? Let me turn that off. Oh, I didn't zoom down far enough. Let's turn that off. So the button I'm looking for is to turn it into a toggle, right? Ah, it's right here, mode. So right now the mode on a button is not to be a toggle, but to be a button. So let's switch this to a toggle. Now I'm going to go over here. When the text is off, I'm going to say loop off. And when the button is on, I'm going to say loop on. Spell this correctly. Okay, and you'll notice too that the colors changed over here. So let's actually lock this and see what we get. Loop on and loop off. So there's lots of stuff we can do with the colors if we want to change this. But now if I attach this to the toggle, you'll see the loop on is going to send a 1 and the loop off is going to send a 0. Okay, so now I could technically, like, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff I could do with this. I could give this a background color, use background color. I could also, use a text over color. You can play around with this. Another thing I might recommend you do, you could just copy the mute button, right, and modify this if you wanted. That would be the easiest thing to do. So right now, instead of it saying toggle, it's going to say loop off, loop on, and then maybe we just change the colors a little bit. So the on color is green. Let's check here. Oops. Well, it's not showing it because of the length. So let's also change the font size. Change this from 24 to 12. Now I can make it smaller. So, but you can see that the colors are, it's interesting GUI wise, like that looks like it's on, right? Or I don't know. You can decide what you think. I'm going to have my on color be green, I guess. I don't know. Let's pick a green. And my off color, oh, this is the text. The background color, which is the off color, to be, I don't know, let's pick like a gray. There we go. Let's go down. There we go. So now when this is on, it's going to be green, and then off, there we go. Okay? So anyways, the last thing I want to talk about is taking the sig tilde and doing something interesting with it. So you could also, like, imagine having the pitch change in real time. Like, you could ramp the values. Like, you could do all kinds of stuff in here. So for instance, instead of running all these in here, let's use the pack. I'm going to use a float, and then I'm going to type 200. Okay, and then we're going to use line. So now, instead of these pitches, or instead of the sound instantly changing, it's actually going to wind up to a new pitch value, right? And now another thing I need to do is change these numbers to be decimals, because I want to reflect the fact that we want float values for all of these, because we're ramping now. 8, 0. Okay, so let's listen to this now. If I unmute it and trigger. So you can hear the ramp, but it's kind of, it's not very long. So let's pick a longer audio file. Let me pick something. How about these crickets? Cricket sounds. So let's hear this now. So, and let's lengthen this float, this to 400. So you can hear the ramping. Right? It's like ramping the value. So that's kind of interesting. So anyways, this is just one way that we can use audio files. On your homework, you need to build a simple drum machine. So we will do that in class, but as you can imagine, you need to have lots of buffers, right? Imagine you have a buffer called cats. You have one called, imagine you have one called kick for the kick drum. You have one called snare, and you have one called hi-hats, right? And you are basically triggering notes to build a simple, very simple drum machine with audio files. Then obviously too, with each of these, you're going to need a new player each time, right? One that's kicks, one that's snares, one that's etc. So each groove object is paired with a buffer with the same name. That's the only way to play different audio files. Anyways, that's it.